Marley's Ghost.
Marley was dead to begin with. He was dead as a doornail. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm about to relate. Scrooge. Scrooge was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, covetous, clutching old sinner. Secret and self-contained, he liked to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, so that he might keep an eye on his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who in an adjoining dismal little cell was working his ledgers. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle. God save you." It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew. "Bah, humbug." "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "Humbug? You don't mean that, I'm sure." "Out upon Merry Christmas. If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas in his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Uncle." "Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way and I'll keep it in mine." "Keep it, but you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone again." Scrooge's nephew replied, "Christmas time is a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, and I say God bless it." Bob Cratchit involuntarily applauded. "Very good, sir. God bless Christmas." "Cratchit, let me hear another sound from you and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation." "Nephew, you're quite a powerful speaker. I wonder you don't go into Parliament." "Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." "I'll see you in hell first." Scrooge's nephew cried, "But why? Why?" "Good afternoon." "I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last, so a Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon." "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon." "And a Merry Christmas to you, Bob Cratchit, and the Missus and Tiny Tim." The clerk answered, "A Merry Christmas to you, sir."
God rest ye.
"God bless it." "There's another lunatic," muttered Scrooge. This lunatic clerk, Bob Cratchit, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, let two other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one gentleman, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago, this very night." "Ah. Oh. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time." "Are there no prisons? And the workhouses, are they still in operation?" "They are still," returned the gentleman. "I wish I could say that they were not." "What shall we put you down for?" "Nothing." "Oh, you wish to be anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I've mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there." "Many can't go there, and many would rather die." "If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon."
God
Good
rest ye
afternoon,
merry
Mr. Scrooge,
gentlemen,
and
let
a
nothing
Merry
you
Christmas to you.
dismay.
Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened so, foggier yet and colder, piercing, searching, biting cold. The owner of one scant young nose stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol.
God rest ye merry gentlemen.
Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day, to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. In Bethlehem in Israel, His blessed babe was born, and laid within a manger upon this blessed lawn, to which His mother Mary did nothing take in scorn. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy.
At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. "You want all day tomorrow, I suppose?" "If it's quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop a half a crown for it, you think yourself ill-used?" "Yes, sir." "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." "It's only once a year, sir." "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his great coat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." "Merry Christmas, Mr. Scrooge." "Bah!" The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white scarf dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went on his way. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiling the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. The arch of the house was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. And then, let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw on the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. It had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look. The hair was curiously stirred, though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. Before he shut the heavy door to his bedroom, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. Sitting room, bedroom, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in, double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. His glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room, and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw the bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the cask in the wine merchant's cellar. A ghost! I know him! Marley's ghost! The same face, the very same. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see 2 buttons on his coat behind. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much!" Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then? You're particular for a shade." "In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley. You don't believe in me. Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because you may be a bit of undigested beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato." Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "In life, my spirit never roamed beyond the narrow limits of my money-changing world. I am doomed to wander through the world to find my fellow man, and weary journeys lie before me." 7 years dead and traveling all that time? You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years. Know that no space of regret can make amends for life's opportunities misused. Yet such was I, and such are you. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob. Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance were all my business. Hear me, Ebenezer Scrooge. My time is dearly gone. I will, said Scrooge. But don't be hard on me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring. Ebenezer, you will be visited by 3 spirits. I think I'd rather not. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow. when the bell tolls one. Couldn't I take them all at once and have her over with, Jacob? Expect a second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us. The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the specter reached it, it was wide open. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms. Soon, they and their spirit voices faded altogether, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge went straight to bed without undressing and fell asleep upon the instant.
Stave 2, the first of the three spirits.
When Scrooge awoke, he listened for the hour. He remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled one. A light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of the bed were drawn. Ah. Scrooge found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them, as close to it as I am now to you. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, but diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white, as if with age, yet the face had not a wrinkle in it. It was brilliant, but transparent, like the flame of a candle. Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me? I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? No, your past. Rise and walk with me, Ebenezer. Would it be vain for me to plead that I'm clad lightly in slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and have cold upon me? I am mortal spirit and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand here, and you shall be upheld in more than this. As these words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished, for it was a cold, clear winter day with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven," said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." They walked along this road, Scrooge recognizing every gate, post, and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance with its bridge, its church, its winding river. Some boys called to other boys in country gates and carts, and horses driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it.
Here we come a-caroling among the leaves so green. Here we come a-wandering so fair to be seen. Love and joy come to you that Christmas too. And God bless you and send you a happy new year. And God send you a happy new year. We are not daily beggars that beg from door to door, but we are neighbors' children whom you have seen before. Love and joy come to you, and to you that Christmas too. And God bless you and send you a happy new year. And God send you a happy new year.
The ghost said, now standing inside the schoolroom. But the school is not quite deserted. There was a chilly barrenness to the place, which associated itself with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still. Scrooge muttered, I know it. I am that solitary child I see before me. I wish, but it's too late now. What is the matter? Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all. The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, let us see another Christmas. There Scrooge was again, but now a young man. He was alone again when the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays.
On Christmas night all Christians sing to hear the news the angels bring. On Christmas night all Christians sing to hear the news the angels bring. News of great joy, news of great birth, news of the merciful King
Young Scrooge, not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly, glancing anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl much younger than the boy young Scrooge came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as,
Dear brother, I've come to bring you home, dear brother.
said the child, clapping her tiny hands.
To bring you home. Home.
Home, little Fan?
Yes, home for good and all. Home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be, and home is like heaven. Father sent me in a coach to bring you, and we're never to come back here. But first, we are to have the merriest time in all the world.
You are quite a woman, little Fan. She clapped her hands and laughed and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him in her childish eagerness towards the door, and he accompanied her. Always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered, but she had a large heart. She died a woman and had one child, your nephew. Yes, my nephew. They left the school behind them and were now on the busy thoroughfares of the city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time again. But it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it! I was apprenticed here. They went in, at the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting on such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart! It's Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen, looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, and laughed all over himself, and called out, "Yo-ho, my boys! No work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson." There were dances, there were forfeits, and more dances. There was cake, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig, top couple too. But if there had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. When the clock struck 11, this domestic bell broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their station, one on either side of the door, and shaking their hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. The ghost said, studying Scrooge for a sign of change in him, "Small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. Small. Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge. "It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it's impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness is great as if it cost a fortune." The ghost stood patiently observing him. What is the matter? Nothing particular. Something, I think. No. I should like to be able to say a word to my clerk just now, that's all. Spirit, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? Take me back. Haunt me no longer. My time grows short. Quick. The ghost, brilliant but insubstantial as a candle flame, wavered. Then suddenly, as if caught in a draft, sputtered sideways and was blown out. A narrow tendril of smoke was all that remained.
Day 3, the second of the three spirits.
Awakening, Scrooge saw a bloody, ruddy light streaming through the cracks of the adjoining room. He got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the knock, a strange voice called out to him by his name and bade him, "Enter!" He obeyed. It was his own room. There was no doubt about it. But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright, gleaming berries glistened. In easy state upon a couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. Come in, and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly. "I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. The ghost was clothed in one simple green robe bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its chest was bare. It bore no other covering than a holly wreath on its head, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls hung long and free. The ghost of Christmas present rose. "Will you come forth with me, Ebenezer Scrooge? Touch my robe." Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkey's punch, all the feasts, all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow. Their flight stopped at Bob Cratchit's poor four-room house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed up but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence. Her daughters also brave in ribbons. The feast was nearly ready. Goose was almost cooked.
What has ever got your precious father then?
Said Mrs. Cratchit.
And your brother, Tiny Tim. And Martha Warren, she is late last Christmas Day by half an hour.
Here's Martha, Mother.
Said Martha, appearing as she spoke.
Here's Martha, Mother.
Cried the two young Cratchits.
Brother, such a goose, Martha. Bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are.
Said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing Martha a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her in officious zeal.
We'd a deal of work to finish up last night and had to clear away this morning, Mother.
Well, never mind, so long as you are come. Sit ye down by the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless you.
No, there's Father coming.
Cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once.
Hi, Martha.
Hi.
So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of scarf exclusive of the fringe hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Why, where's our Martha? Said Bob.
Not coming.
Not coming? Not coming upon Christmas Day? Martha didn't like to see him disappointed if it were only a joke. So she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms.
I'm here, Father.
And how did little Tim behave?
Asked Mrs. Cratchit when she had rallied Bob on his credulity, and Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content. As good as gold, said Bob. And better. You know, he told me coming home that he hoped that people who saw him in church, because he was a cripple, that it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Martha, Tiny Tim, I believe, is growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came in Tiny Tim before another word was spoken. 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession.
Here's the goose.
At last, the dishes were set on, and the grace was said. Bob said, I don't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the entire family. This was followed by plum pudding, the climax of the feast. At last, the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth.
is ready, Father,
announced Mrs. Cratchit and passed the glasses round. Bob toasted, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us."
God bless us.
God bless us, everyone.
Said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side. Upon his little stool, Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live. I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered, by the future, the child will die. Oh, no, Spirit, say that he will be spared. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, he will not be found here. What then? If he be like to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population." Bob Cratchit said to the gathered family, "Mr. Scrooge, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast,"
The founder of the feast indeed.
cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening.
I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have good appetite for it.
"My dear, the children, Christmas Day."
It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow.
"My dear, Christmas Day."
I will drink his health for your sake and the day's, not for his.
The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings that had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow upon the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. By and by, Tiny Tim broke the spell with a little song.
There was a little child traveling in the snow. He lost his companion and didn't know where to go.
There was nothing of high mark in this little song, but to those gathered round, it was echoed by trumpets in heaven.
Didn't know where to go.
They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof, and their clothes were scanty. They knew the inside of a pawnbroker's, but they were happy, pleased with one another, and content with the time. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stone were tossed about, as though it were the burial place of giants. "What place is this?" asked Scrooge. "A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth, but they know me. See?"
Mercy, God and sinners.
light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled round a glowing fire. An old man, with his face all scarred and damaged with hard weather, as the figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself, and women and their children, and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, decked out gaily in their holiday attire, wished each other Merry Christmas in their can of grog.
Hark the herald angels sing.
And then, as swiftly, they were transported again.
Glory to the newborn King.
Oh, your Uncle Scrooge refused again, Fred.
Scrooge's nephew laughed. Ha! He said Christmas is a humbug as I live. He believed it too,
More's the shame for him, Fred.
said Scrooge's niece indignantly. He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Scrooge's niece observed,
I have no patience for him.
Oh, he's mean.
I'm sorry for him, and couldn't be angry with him if I cried. Who suffers from his ill whims? Himself always. Here he takes it in his head to take a dislike to us, and won't come and dine with us. Scrooge's niece interrupted.
Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner.
No dinner for him.
I was only going to say that the consequences of Scrooge taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, I think, that he loses some pleasant moments, which would do him no harm. But this whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken, and Scrooge and his spirit were again upon their travels. Looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open space, Scrooge noticed that its hair was gray, its skin was mottled. Are spirits' lives so short? My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight. Tonight? Said Scrooge. Tonight at midnight. Hark, the time is drawing near. Forgive me if I'm not justified in what I ask, said Scrooge, looking intently at Scrooge's robe, at Spirit's robe. But I see something strange, not belonging to yourself, protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw? It was a child's foot, though there was little flesh upon it. From the foldings of its robe, Spirit brought forth two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. Oh man, look here, look down here. They were a boy and a girl. Scrooge started back, appalled. Spirit, are they yours? They are man's, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom. Unless the writing be erased. Have they no refuge or resource? Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Scrooge looked about him for this ghost and saw it not. Lifting his eyes up, he beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him.
Stay 4, the last of the spirits.
The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came, Scrooge knelt down upon his knee, for the very air through which the spirit moved seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? Will you not speak to me? It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before him. Lead on, lead on. The night is waning fast, and it's precious time to me. I know, spirit, lead on. The spirit stopped behind one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know that he's dead. When did he die? Last night, I believe. Why, what was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die. God knows. What has he done with his money? I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps. All I know is he hasn't left it to me. That's all I know. It's likely to be a very cheap funeral, for upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer. I don't mind going if lunch is provided, but I must be fed if I make one. Speakers and listeners strolled away, and mixed with other groups, Scrooge knew the men and looked towards the spirit for an explanation. Not another word. They left the busy scene and went to an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before. Although he recognized its bad repute, the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, with misery. Far in this quarter was a den of infamous resort. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of refuse of all kinds. Sitting among the iron rags and refuse he dealt in was a gray-haired rascal nearly 70 years of age, who smoked his pipe. He was known to the refuse dealers only as Joe. A scrawny rag picker appeared, followed by a great woman with a substantial bundle on her back. An undertaker, dressed all in black, stood silently by. What have you to sell? What have you to sell? Demanded old Joe. While he did this, the great woman threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows at her knees and looking with a bold defiance.
Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. If he'd wanted to keep him after he was dead, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying there gasping out his last, alone, by himself.
The scrawny woman added,
We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe.
What do you call this, bed curtains? Said Joe. You don't mean to say you took him down, rings and all, with him lying there dead? His blankets too?
Whose else's do you think?
Replied the great woman.
He isn't likely to take gold without him now, I dare say. You may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare spot. It's the best he had, and a fine one too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me.
What do you mean, wasting of it?
Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure.
Oh.
Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again.
Then old Joe produced a flannel bag with money in it and told out the women several gains upon the ground. "This is the end of it, you see." The great woman added,
He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead.
"If there is any person in this town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that person to me, spirit, I beseech you." The ghost conducted him through several streets, familiar to his feet. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and children quietly seated round the fire. The youngest children sat like statues. Mrs. Cratchit and her daughters were engaged in sewing. Master Peter, the eldest, was reading, and he took a child and set him in the midst of him. "What's the matter, mother? Why have you stopped your needlework?" The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face.
The color hurts my eyes.
"The color? Ah, poor Tiny Tim," said Peter.
They're better now again. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time.
"Past it, rather," Peter answered, shutting up his book. "But I think he has walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings, Mother."
I have known him work with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed.
"And so have I, often,"
And so have I.
But Tiny Tim was very light to carry,
she resumed, intent upon her work.
and his father loved him so it was no trouble. No trouble. And there is your father at the door. You went today then, Robert?
"Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "You should have gone. It would have done you good to see how pleasant a place it is. You'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child. My little child." "Spectre," said Scrooge. "Something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how." They reached an iron gate leading to a churchyard. Scrooge paused to look around before entering. Here then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. "Before I draw near to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or the things that might be only?" Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name: "Ebenezer Scrooge! No, spirit, no, no, no!" The finger was still there. "Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. Why show me this if I am past all hope?" For the first time, the hand appeared to shake. "Good spirit, your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me yet that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life." The kind hand trembled again. "I will honor Christmas with thy heart. I will keep it all year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I shall not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on the stone." In his agony, he caught the spectral hand and sought to free itself. But Scrooge was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Suddenly, Scrooge saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost.
end of it.
Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The bed curtains not torn down. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. Here I am. I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. But I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello, whoop, whoop. Hello, here. The churches rang out, the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Oh, glorious, glorious.
Joy to the world, the Lord.
Running to the window, he opened it.
Let earth receive her King.
What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling down to a boy. What's today, my fine fellow?
Why, today is Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow.
Hello?
Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one at the corner?
Well, I should hope I did.
Intelligent boy. Very remarkable boy. Do you know whether they sold the prize turkey that was hanging there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one?
The one as big as me?
What a delightful boy. What a pleasure to talk to him. Yes.
It's hanging there now.
Is it? Go and buy it.
Walker!
No, I'm in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction of where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. He shan't know who sends it.
Joy to the world,
He went to church
the Lord
and
is
walked about the streets and watched people hurrying to and fro and patted little children on the head and questioned beggars. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said,
Good morning, sir.
A Merry Christmas to you.
Blessings of the day to you.
Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare in room, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. He rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of His righteousness, and wonders of His love, and wonders of His love, and wonders of His love.
In the afternoon, he turned his step towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash for it and did it. Is your master home, my dear? Nice girl, very.
Yes, sir.
Where is he, my love?
He's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please.
Thank you. He knows me. I'll go in here, my dear. He turned the knob gently and sidled his face around the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in great array. Fred! Why, bless my soul, cried Fred. Who's that? It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Let him in. It's a mercy Fred didn't shake Scrooge's arm off. wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he could be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. Hello. What do you mean coming in here at this time of day? I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time. You are. Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please. It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. We'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking Bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them. For he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened in this globe for good, in which some people did not have their fill of laughter at the outset. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that truly be said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,